Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Business Growth Titans. And I'm really grateful that we have our guest, Chuck Kirkpatrick, on the phone here on our podcast.
Yeah.
Welcome, Chuck.
Thank you so much, Stefan. It's amazing to be here. This is a great conversation to have on a Friday.
Absolutely. It's entirely my pleasure that you're here. And for the listeners, I'm going to try to introduce you a little bit. So just interrupt me if I'm getting something wrong. But basically, you, Chuck, are a global innovator and you try to make people grow, businesses grow. I try to put it as simple as possible because on the side there's disruptive technology builder, serial entrepreneur. You're founder of your own company, of course,
Right.
CKXD Studio.
Yeah,
So that's a whole lot of things together.
it
If
is.
you really try to narrow it down and, like I said, try to simplify it, how
Sure.
would you describe it?
Yeah. Well, the way I describe it is that I've led projects in more than 25 countries, and I've worked on more than 25 verticals, and I've put teams to work to do the things that businesses need. So it might be conversational AI is the hot topic, but until you get down into the process and figure out if they're ready, there's not much point. But we've had great success in selling through partners or through other organizations that have technology. And, you know, within a year, if we follow really good principles, we can help a business grow 7 figures, so, 11 million, $12 million in a year's time if they are disciplined about it. And similarly, we've had growth of like 1,100% for a product line. That's not every single product line, but it happens when you know the audience and you research and you do things the right way. So really for me, growth is the message, and there are lots of ways to get there, but it's having the discipline and the systems to really get into the heart of what's going wrong and how to help.
Yeah, and then that's exactly also where we stand for. Growth is here the common denominator.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been talking a little bit before the show, and in there we talked about why are some companies not ready for growth, even if they think they are and they
Right.
want to grow. If they come to you, what do you look at for knowing if a company is really ready to grow?
Right. It's amazing the the mentality that people bring. And I think of a guy, I'll call him Bob. Bob came saying that he was ready to go after e-commerce. And he thought e-commerce was going to be the thing. They had been doing e-commerce for a while. And I talk about Bob and what happened. And it's amazing. They were a company that was convinced that they had to sell using a 100-year-old approach. And I would call that 100-year approach like a Model T kind of approach. They really wanted the person-to-person sales, and it had nothing to do with e-commerce. They wanted to send somebody 10 months before a purchase would actually be delivered. And so they would come in like October, and they would sell to you, and then they would turn on a website for 2 weeks after that person visited, and then they would turn it off, and it wouldn't be on for the rest of the year because they had really outdated production cycles. It took 9 to 12 months to build these things, and these weren't extraordinary. These were like graduation products, like caps and gowns and fine paper products, things that other people could do like very quickly. So Bob came with this idea that they were ready for e-commerce, and he paid substantially. He paid about $750,000 for 3 consultants and probably another outside digital strategy firm that came in and did a full big long assessment. And we all reached the same conclusion. They were totally like in a decline because they weren't meeting their young audience with online things and 24/7 things. And you got to the end of it and they said, we will never spend the money that you're suggesting. And our question was, why did you spend the $750,000 to begin with? And that might be 450,000, 500,000 euros. That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money.
And the problem was they were super delighted with this old model of sending a person to the individual school, and they had the contract, and so the school couldn't go anywhere. But the students were adept at hopping online and creating their own, programs or announcements about graduation coming up. And it's a big deal in the US to have a creative way to represent that for a high schooler. And they go on Shutterfly or other sites like that and make their own cool little announcement. Well, now they no longer need this company that Bob had. And the point for me was Bob had spent 30 years as a plant manager, and he knew every bit of the details of how to make these things go using a 9 to 10 month cycle. And so his thought for success was, let's do a version of digital that is just like that. We'll have 3 weeks of digital and then we don't talk to them again. And that's not obviously how people think these days. And I represent how people think these days as like Tesla thinking, right? Like instead of having to build a whole car, if you want to update a Tesla, you just do a software update and the whole car may have a new capability out of the battery, may have new capability in acceleration, may have new guidance. And until you understand how far the Model T, 1930s era car is from the Tesla, it's hard to appreciate how impossible it might be on the first go round for these kinds of companies to suddenly switch. If it's somebody who's run the company a certain way for 30 years, they will listen, and then they'll go right back to doing the same thing they were doing before.
It's what I call, like, I've read this before, I keep repeating it as well, like the most expensive words in a business is we've done it always like this.
Right.
You know?
Right.
That
Right.
kind of mindset just stops any kind of innovation, any
It
kind
does.
of. And the question is here, like, why do you think, especially in these times with COVID happening and the whole world is changing, so being a company that can adapt to change is so important? Why is it still such a big mindset shift for most of them that they don't even think about that?
I think there are really two key reasons. The first is that in many of these organizations, there's a group that I would call the saints. They're the people you can't question because they've always done it a certain way, like you described. And they were very successful in growing the company for maybe the last 50 years or something like that. And at this company that Bob worked at, you were told over and over, don't ever question the sales reps that do this person to person. Don't do that, because they grew the company. And they had even bought out the sales reps. They had even moved from being an employee-owned company to now being fully owned by private equity. And they still said anybody who came could never question the go sell it once and wait 10 months to deliver it model. And so there's the saints, and being able to question them would be one side of it. But the other side of it is a failure to recognize how much disaster is looming, right? So for this company, I worked with them in 2016. And at the time, they were already about 10 years behind on technology. They were already being told that most of the technology they had built, which was, just stitched together very loosely, had never been really hardened. Most of the technology was on Flash and other things that were going away in 2016. They never did the removal of Flash. And we said, if you invest, a few $1 million right now, in about 5 years, you'll have a return on your investment and you'll be growing again. And they said, nope, we're not going to invest. We want return on investment now. And just this last year, a good friend is reaching out to say, hey, do you have a director of marketing role I could help with? Because we just lost $50 million, 10% of our revenue, even after cuts, even after all this stuff, because they didn't dig in 5 years ago when it was late, but they still could have done something. They said, we'll keep riding our boat down into the water or something like that.
That's just amazing. So why in the first place that then they did try to reach out to you? Were they thinking about, like, you had like the quick win, which would immediately have an ROI? Or
I think a lot of companies think, if I hire a consultant and they come in, or I hire a team and they come in, then I can just do a Band-Aid and we're good. What they don't think about is that their inability to see what maybe their young millennial staff know, their frontline staff know, their ability to listen has been crippled over the years, because a lot of companies were very successful, particularly if they become large enterprises. They're successful because somebody at the top says, this is how it's going to be. And nobody questions that person. Well, that's great as long as that business model and that business cycle works. But the moment that it shifts to something new, you've got to decentralize for a while. So instead of top down, you've now got to say, let's do 100 experiments and come up with lots of ideas and see where we can go. The person who did top down for 30 years cannot do that easily. You could make them, but if they're the person at the top, good luck. They're going to run the company until it's zero revenue and then say, oh boy, we couldn't have pictured that outcome, even though we pictured the outcome.
Yeah, and that kind of a model is what we see with successful companies that are growing pretty quickly. I mean, look at Tesla or look at Spotify or look at some of these others. They are the innovators in the way that you manage your company. It's indeed no longer the command and control. It's no longer the top down. It's like that more flat structure, but where you foster the innovation to create something that people really need, because you can see it from the tests indeed.
Right.
That's a mindset.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is the data really shows that the companies that invest substantially in research and development consistently are the biggest winners. And a great example is they were looking at a study. This was either Harvard Business Review or McKinsey. It was one of the substantial consulting firms. And they looked at companies that were all over $1 billion that were looked at in like a 25-year period. And one of the absolute top leaders, there were like 2 or 3, was Microsoft. And it's a top-down company, but they invested relentlessly in innovation. 20% a year of revenue went back into innovation. And the net result was that they continued to find ways to do things. When Apple would come out with an innovation, when a browser would come out that had something, they found a way to respond because they invested so much. And it's hard for people to grasp that. You don't just top-down leadership and win. You can do that for a while, but you've got to also instill a culture of investing in ideas and people, and it takes money.
Chuck, it's really refreshing to talk to people like you who have that kind of a mindset. But I can imagine, I have a question, like, where for you did that kind of a mindset start for you? Where did you realize, okay, guys, this is really not working. You have to do it another way.
Right. Well, it's funny. I was just talking to a friend of mine. I think there's an entrepreneurial mindset. They talk about maybe 4% of people have it, where you're willing to take risks. You're willing to hear what somebody else said about the way to do it, and you say, I think I've got a better way. And it's sort of ingrained. And I can say it really started for me. My very first job that I was given, totally unexpectedly, somebody showed up at the playground when I was 6 years old. And he said, I have 500 flyers. Would you and your friend hand them out? And we'll give you each $10. And he said, why don't you go down the street where there are all these houses and hand out flyers individually? And nobody asked parents. It's crazy when I think about it now. But $10 was like, this is huge. So I went to the first house and there was this giant dog there. And I wasn't going to go up, and it was just barking like crazy. I was 6. And I said, you know what? I think there's a better way. I turned around and I walked 3 or 4 blocks to a university, and I went into the dorm and I handed out 500 flyers in about 40 minutes. So now I was making, instead of $10 an hour, maybe $13, $14 an hour, because I was doing it very efficiently. I look back on that story, and that's been the story for me all through business. I'm like, I love what you're telling me. I think I've got a different way, but let's, experiment. Let's figure it out together.
But your story didn't really start as an entrepreneur, right? You worked for a bigger company, and then and I noted here in my notes, in my research, a really fun thing you have to talk about is like you were fired from a major network.
I was.
In 2005, and that sparked your company then? Am I right?
And what's funny is it would be fairly easy to say, I could make the argument that I've been fired from 7 different companies in the course of my work. And I take that as a badge of honor, because I'm not ever a slipshod worker. I'm not ever a person that doesn't work as hard as I can in every way that I can. But what I find again and again is these cultural challenges that we're talking about. Frankly, I'm proud of the fact that I would say we need to do this thing. And I'm not arguing with somebody. I'm not insulting them. A lot of times people would be cursing at me or things like that. I just say, hey, we need to stay the course on the right approach. I think it's that that I'm inflexible about doing really good quality work that makes a difference. But back at the beginning, where I first really encountered this, I was so surprised. I was working for a network. It's a nonprofit network in the United States, and they had a big education relations department. So I was part of that. We had outreach to schools. So for me, I'm from the kind of social sciencey, like let's do good kind of thing. And I hadn't yet realized how much I was an entrepreneur. But I had a very strong request from my wife at the time that I come home for Valentine's Day. And we had to commute huge long distance. We were in the Washington, D.C. area. So the commute was like 2 hours each way. So I didn't get to see her much. She really wanted to see me for a Valentine's Day dinner. And I said, okay. And I knew the company wouldn't like it. Even though I was working the full time, I left at 5:15 and I got there. But to make it work, I had to tell the company I had an appointment. I couldn't even say, I'm going to go see my wife for dinner. I said, I have an appointment I have to go to. I was fired 2 weeks later. And they would say, something like I didn't have the technical skills for the job. I had the most technical skills. They would say various excuses, but it was entirely because they wanted to say, you're going to do what we say you're going to do or else. And I've often found people will try that with me, and I'll say, okay, well, I'm going to keep going with my idea, because if I've got a compelling reason and there's a business value out of it, I would like that valuable thing to be created. And that's my passion, right? It's you lose jobs because there's not an alignment between you and that team. And if the team is okay, losing $50 million a year, I'm not a good fit at all.
Yeah, that alignment is so important. And not even from our perspective as externals towards the company, but also internally, that alignment, like you just said, like if the culture is not there, if there's no alignment between you and your employees, it blows my mind sometimes that there's still growth happening for some of these companies.
Right. Yep.
But you see them also crashing down, even if they are successful.
Yeah, and it's difficult to convey to people how absurd some of the choices can be. I was working at a company whose sole mission was to take a membership base and get them to buy more things on their site. And so the entire range of success had only to do with, could we get more sales? And there was a person who came in who was supposed to be this expert on business, and he had a degree from our finest university, supposedly Harvard University. And he was convinced that what he needed to do first and foremost was to use our ad space to penalize partners who weren't offering deals and who weren't doing things. So he wanted to run an ad that said no deals offered or something, nothing to do with selling, more to do with kind of roughing up the partners a little bit. And we said, could we test one other idea? And we tested an idea that we would just say shop deals now instead of, no partner deals or something. Like positively influence them that if they're already looking for deals, whatever. It had an 18 to 20% lift in sales in the markets we tested. And usually we were used to like 1% being good or 2% being good. It had 18 to 20% because they were already motivated and so on. He said, nope, we're not going to do that. We're like, this is about making money. Yours is about penalizing somebody. Why don't you want to make money? He says, we're not going to do that. I'm in charge. There you go.
End of story. Yeah.
End of story. And you can back off at that point because, I'm not going to overwhelm someone with evidence if they don't care about the evidence. But I do want to present the evidence and say, we could get you 20% more revenue. That sounds exciting to me. What do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, you've been in this business in your company for almost 15 years, right?
Right.
So how do you incorporate these things, these principles, this culture, the state of mind, and so on, mindset within your own company to get that growth? How do you?
For me, I have to stay very, very lean. We've had some very interesting, economic surge up and down over the last 15 years. Really, when I got started with this, I was trying to answer the question, what do I do with having lost a job in a major market, had to leave that major market, was just transitioning to figure out the next right thing. And I came to realize that I had a really good ability to assess quickly, help people kind of figure out some initial steps. And and it was a better fit for me to be a consultant. So I've done different versions of consulting about 5 different times, 5 different companies. And in the midst of that, I'll transition into helping, a major digital network or a major e-commerce company for the United States. And, we'll have success where we might get them $5 million on a $21 million revenue line. Like we're good at taking a mid-market company and helping them grow 25 to 50%. And then occasionally you can hit these home runs that get you to 1,100%. But for me, the principles, I have to find people who are really dissatisfied with less than perfect, right? They don't have to be a perfectionist per se, but they have to be really motivated when they see things that are wrong in the process, that they would call it out and that they would want to attack that problem. If I've got people like that, I can do almost anything, because they then maybe have to have the second idea of sort of a positive approach, right? Like I talk about being a global nomad or a global innovation nomad. I'm very service oriented. I was born in Central Africa. I have missionary parents. So I really live and breathe the idea that I'm here to serve people and take great care of people. So, similarly, it's a person that has a positive orientation and says, you know what, we may not have done this before, but let's figure out a way to do it together now. Those kind of people really are very successful in working with me. And then I'd say a third key principle is really about the willingness to look at the data and continue to engage back and forth if there's disagreement. Data doesn't mean that suddenly you get everybody lined up. Usually data means people are going to hide data, people are going to distort data, people are going to try and cheat on a key head-to-head test because they want their side to win. So the data conversation is like multiple rounds where you're trying to get more robust and get better, rather than see it as we pulled a lever and now we have data and everything's great. More often than not, the first data projects are a giant cluster of political infighting. But if you can get past that, that's when you start to get the benefit. Once they get to the culture that we could expose our data and not lose our jobs, that's when you can start to have real success. So
what would you say is your go-to method to get a company into that stage that they want to look at the data and that they are confident that we need to improve this?
Right. It is, I would say it's really an Odyssey, right? Like I think very much of the ancient story of the Odyssey and Homer writing about, Ulysses taking this 7-year journey to get somewhere. I don't think that a successful project has to take the company that's losing $50 million a year and suddenly instantly turn them around. What it has to do is maybe give them a platform from which to take the next step. So if you can kind of give yourself some breathing room and recognize that change is hard. I mean, so many different project management and other disciplines talk about how change and transformation are so disorienting and frustrating. And instead, if you can build alliances and you can start with like a center of excellence somewhere in the company and get them some wins, there's a whole approach that I think takes kind of a network strategy where you're finding the influencers. You're saying, let's talk about what changes you guys would like, get them on board with maybe some additions. And it's much more like a campaign than it is like, hey, we're pulling the lever and we're solving the problems and you guys are dumb, we're smart. You can't approach it like that or you get tossed out really fast.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, big companies, but also smaller companies. I just talked to another agency owner today who is also like struggling. How can we create a culture in our team for better communication so everybody trusts each other? And
right.
Like you said, it's exactly what we need to do to grow our business.
Right.
And business is creating relationships outside, but also inside our company. Because I said to them, try to create touch points regularly with your employees, from top management to employees or middle management, so you get to know each other. Because otherwise you lose sight of what's happening, what they are thinking, and in the end, it's them that need to do the job. So if you don't
Right.
create some kind of relationship, you lose touch on everything. Big company, small company, you're going to get hurt from that.
Right. Yeah, I think it's so interesting. I completely agree. The kind of the modeling that you do, the ways in which you demonstrate this is what good communication looks like to your team, and then you expect them to do that. I totally get that point. The surprise to me, what's so funny about this conversation with you, is that last year I spent 8 months very closely working with a major mobile carrier in the Netherlands. And it's the kind of business where you have to do a bunch of software demos and a bunch of models of what you're going to do before you get any payment. And about 4 months into the project, it was kind of clear this particular person was just fishing for ideas, that he actually wanted to build it himself. And after about 4 months more, we had spent probably $85,000, maybe 50,000 euros worth of time and trouble to land the sale. And he just started playing around with other people, like people we had brought to the table. He started to have private meetings with and so on. And we just said, look, are you going to come to the table and sign right now or not? Because the boundary that we needed to set was that if you're asking us to do all this stuff for you for free, we need to be in every conversation. And if you're not going to be that person of integrity, we're not going to work with you. We're not even going to spend 5 minutes. He said, well, why don't you bring your architecture diagrams to the next thing? I said, no, we're all done here. And to be able to walk away as quickly as possible the moment you identify there's a problem issue, I think is essential for agencies or software builders, because a lot of people are more than happy to use their enterprise status. And keep in mind, this is a major carrier right there in your country. They want to use their power, and sometimes they use it for good, and sometimes they play around. But keeping your antenna alert and getting out as fast as you can is essential. And I find it so funny because I left that project in November, having lost a lot of money, saying, boy, I'm not sure if I would ever do anything in Amsterdam again. And here we are talking about good business, right?
I'm close to Amsterdam. I'm actually in Belgium.
Right, there you go. But
in terms of in American metrics, I would say it's very close to each other.
Right,
it's next to each other.
Yes.
In our questionnaire, and when we asked you some questions as well beforehand, you talked about what helped you overcome your biggest challenges in your business throughout the years. And you're talking about staying inspired, right?
Yeah.
Live inspired. Now, what does that mean for you?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time researching what themes attract people on like LinkedIn or sometimes Facebook. But if I'm targeting a business audience, what themes do they want to hear about? And I'm not talking about like just putting quotes up or something like that. Like what images would they respond to? What words would they respond to? And I spent the better part of last year with, I don't know, probably 10 or 12 different mini experiments a week, lots of different themes. The thing that came back again and again and again is people want the idea of like a positive light, like lighting the path, like doing good for each other. And I love that, because to me, that is like global citizenship 101. Like we're all in the business of being human people. So how can we just encourage each other and light the path for good things? So as we kind of think through the imagery on that, the thing that people love are all the aspirational things. So if you have light the path and something of like an exotic location, or like a kind of a smoky sort of picture where there are lights shining through the fog, so many people resonate with that. You maybe have an exotic, like a beach scene in one picture, or Tuscany in another picture. Those kinds of things I think are great for anybody to use if you're selling a consulting improvement product, because that is where so many people are. Those would get hundreds or thousands of hits, where other ideas about a sports car or something like that would be much less.
So it's really creating that image that where you could be, or what you could achieve, and having a dream almost, putting in front of you and looking at it and start dreaming. Oh yeah, I want to be there. So this is indeed inspiring.
Exactly. And I would say too, it's really relevant to me to tie that aspirational place together with something substantive for the marketing push. So for example, just having a picture of a mountain, you know, it's inspiring and it's grand, but if you have people working together to climb up the mountain, then you have an idea that I think really hits a home run, or, you know, kicks the winning score. And it's that ability to kind of conceptualize that good would be the mountain, but great would be a team of 5 people who are trying to climb this mountain together, or in an outdoor setting, like, you know, all hands in the middle. Those ideas that they start with something good, but they really refine it and take it somewhere great. That's the kind of stuff that I think you get if you research and you work hard on investigating.
Yeah, that's awesome. Actually, that's a great tip. And if you connect that to your story, your own story as a coach, as a consultant, where you help people reach a certain goal, and you connect it with that image, that's really powerful.
Right. You know, the question you asked, I think, is so important. What was it that helped me overcome the challenges and the challengers and so on? I had to reach a point where I really came to see that I had a lot of interest in a dialogue with all kinds of people, but I had no interest in a dialogue with critics. And the reason that I had to approach it that way was that I came to see whether I was hugely successful in winning $11 million of business because of the good work that I did in digital. Whether I did that or not, the same critics hated me, whether I made next to nothing or made $11 million. And I would have thought, honestly, I made you $11 million. I made your company this much money. You should say, wow, how can we do more of that? Instead, they said, great, we're done. And I laugh because it doesn't ever occur to me that somebody would say, wow, we made a bunch of money, let's stop the project. But they stop projects like that for every reason under the sun. So I need to get to find those people who actually care about positive outcomes, like making money or working together or collaborating. And the more I can work with people like that, the more I can help. But if instead they're interested in like a power politics goal or, you know, just looking good, they're going to overlook valuable data points, or they're going to say there's a saint and we can't ever question them, or they're going to say whatever they've always said. And, you know, you have to be free to earn and do good work, but also say no to some projects sometimes, because not everybody is going to be a fit for your particular style of, you know, changing the world for good or whatever it is that you want to do.
Yeah, actually finding your ideal customer and not spending too much time on the ones that won't give you anything but trouble, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
You've spent so many projects over these last couple of years, and you've been putting that together actually in a book that you've just created and you just released it.
Right.
Tell me about how that went.
Well, you know, the great thing about building a network of people, whether you're in social media or whatever, you go on a journey when you're doing that. So I would say the book is as much about the journey, and it's about people asking me, would I tell them about the journey? But what I learned back in 13 and 14, I really got serious that I wanted to get way up in the search rank. And this is going to sound hilarious, but I started searching my name, Chuck Kirkpatrick, and I found out that I was not the top guy. The top guy was a music producer who had worked with the Beach Boys and several other really big bands back in the 70s and the 80s. Well, I see competition like that. I'm like, I'm going after him. I'm gonna pass him. So I wrote 120 articles on LinkedIn. I grew my network like crazy. I'm at like 21,000 followers on LinkedIn right now. And I just was relentless about doing this. And after about a year, I passed him. And yay, I'm the top Chuck. And just in the last year, I became friends with him. So now I, Chuck Kirkpatrick, am friends with another Chuck Kirkpatrick, and it's this music producer. Well, he is probably in his early 70s, maybe mid 70s, and he just lost his wife, like his love of his life. And now all of a sudden I'm like, I really shouldn't view him as competition at all, right? Like, this is just another guy who's taking his own journey. And the arc for me is I started building this network and I'm going to compete and win. And now I'm like, I need to be friends with this guy. Like, I should send him a gift or, like, you know, offer sympathy that he's a human being just like me. And I think that shift is what I try to capture in the book, that there's a journey we all take. It can involve journeys to 25 different countries like I've done for work or service projects. But, I think the story for my family, both grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins, is going out to do service internationally is something we've always pursued. So doing that in business is the best thing in the world to me. And that's what the book is about. Global Nomad is really, it's about taking all the serve the world for good stuff from my missionary parents and missionary grandparents and taking all the I want to do good business stuff that I care about and putting those together.
So yeah, you're really the best example, I guess, from like a global citizen, right?
I feel like we all are. Like, what's so funny is, when you reached out and we're talking about your program, right. I knew immediately that we would have some kind of interesting conversation. I didn't know what it would be. I didn't know how it would come together. But I think that if you're open to good conversations with other global citizens, the European ideal of travel to lots of places is reflected in the Indian ideal to travel lots of places, is reflected in the Australian ideal. I've done a show recently with a guy from Melbourne, Australia, and we only did one show, but it was such a hilarious conversation. Somewhere down the road, we may do one again. It's not hard to find people who are motivated to do really good work and grow big business. And they're often people that are called to travel because they're so good at what they do, they get pulled into other projects in other places. That's the reward.
Absolutely. And I love to travel as well. Unfortunately, at this stage, it's a little bit difficult.
It is hard.
For sure, this is also something that I love, connecting with other people, with like-minded people, to talk about this, because I also think it's so important. I've been in corporate for over a decade as well,
right.
where I saw that the way that they work and that they treat each other, the employees, is not working. It's not right. the way I want to do this. And having that open mindset and hearing people like you, Chuck, talking about how it could be a better way to do this is just, it's just awesome. It's just,
Thanks. I think the reality at any level of business is that there are people who will stiff you on a job, not pay you when they've received something, and that can happen in small businesses that I've worked with, and that can happen in big businesses.
Yeah.
I think what's so important in the last year, and relative to your consulting and e-commerce and other things like that, is that the e-commerce model helps to lessen the impact of that. If you say, all right, we're going to do a project and we're going to do 3 different payments, payment 1 up front, and then we get started, and then payment 2, and then we continue the next phase. And if you leverage the e-commerce idea that you pay and then you receive, it completely changes the software conversation. Now, it's not going to be for enterprise because they're used to having somebody spend $100,000 to $1 million in marketing before they buy this thing in enterprise tech. But if you hit small to medium, I think there's a sweet spot where you can say, well, we'll give you this part of a proposal, take that. If you want to use this thing, then pay us some more. And it's shifting the model with e-commerce makes huge sense for businesses right now, whether you're an accountant or a software firm, obviously, or other things like that. There are so many new ways to use e-commerce and say, buy my class, or buy my my Facebook private group, or buy something that previously nobody would have thought about buying it. Now they're like, oh, I got to have that. I need this insight. And we've just opened up new models that we haven't even begun to tap.
Yeah, absolutely. The opportunities are there, and it's the people that make that shift that become successful, or more successful than they were before. We see this as well within even restaurants or bars or whatever. If they can make that shift in mindset that online is the new way to go as well, and they can make that model work for them,
right?
That's a great opportunity. But I will say this, that it's not because you start at online business or a lot of marketing agencies that are popping up as well because they see the opportunity as well as new income stream. They have to be careful. What we have talked about, creating that culture, creating relationships, being a good CEO, or having all the systems in place and building on top of that, so you can inspire people, your customers, your employees. That's where it's at. That will help you become successful. Not, oh, I have to go online, quick win, I'm going to get some money, I'm going to lay on the beach. Those definitely not the one that I want to work with, but it's not going to work anyway. So
yeah, it's so funny. I put up a story today at ckxdigital.com about the power of network building, and everybody pays lip service to the idea, oh yeah, I'm going to hop on LinkedIn and build a network. But I had a friend who had just purchased a sandwich shop, and he literally was on the first day introducing himself to his employees, and he got a lawyer that came by and served him papers from his wife, who, one, divorced him, and two, had taken all of his money. Well, now his promotion budget was gone. He had been counting on a certain chunk of money he had set aside, and it was gone. There was nothing he could do. So he decided he was going to use all of his contacts and connections, and he was going to relentlessly promote everybody else in his community and say, oh, by the way, I'm at this sandwich shop. Well, in doing that, he also said, I'm going to get all the restaurant owners together, and I'm going to say, let's not compete, let's learn from each other. Well, in the midst of that, he found out that one vendor was double charging one of their partners. And the restaurant owners who used to say we're competing, now they said, let's get on the phone together. So even the person who was making, had the less charge, got on the phone to say, why are you doing the double charge? And it just changed the dynamic for everybody. His sandwich shop did very well. And he just sold it this week, and he's moved on to a new line of business. But the success came because he said, I'm going to build all these networks. And the best to me is he is also running for mayor of this town because he's got so many connections, because he's been promoting everybody else's business. So
from starting a sandwich shop to mayor.
And his worst day, right? Like he took bad things and he made really good things happen.
The power of networking. Absolutely. I believe in that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So to close this off, Chuck, this was a great conversation. I want to keep it going forever, but to round it off, what does growth mean for you?
Well, that's one of those most important questions. In the context of what we're talking about, growth for me is what I hear from my partners and my customers and the businesses that I work with. I can think of all kinds of ways that I would like to grow, and I have all kinds of goals of how I want to grow. But my really passionate desire is to figure out what growth means for somebody that I'm working with, somebody that contracts with me, and say, what's your goal? And maybe I'll say, could we make it a little bit bigger? Could we accelerate that a little bit faster? But what I really want to know is what's their big goal and how can we achieve that kind of growth? Because if we're honest, there's some kinds of growth that are beyond what somebody really wants to sustain. If you're talking about scaling, you're talking about all these things. So you really have to take a look at what represents success for this other person. And then how can we turn that into a step-by-step plan where we start to experiment and get some big wins. And, it's growth is really in the eye of the beholder, I guess. And it matters to me to find out what growth means for the people I work with and then facilitate some way for them to get there.
That's a great answer, Chuck. Love it. So where can people find you other than your website, which I will show right here?
Sure, absolutely. ckxdigital.com. These last couple of weeks, I've been in Scottsdale, Arizona, which is a major kind of like international travel hub. There's a lot of sports that come here. There's a lot of events that come here. I've been absolutely blown away by the hotels. It's a desert town that has mountains all around it. Beautiful. Right now, it's probably 11s or 12s in Celsius scale, and it goes up to 37 or 40 in Celsius scale. So the summertime, it's a desert community, but Scottsdale is gorgeous, beautiful cars, all this stuff. So I've been having a lot of fun here, but I think for me, the year is really shaping up to be stories of helping businesses in lots of different places. So if people want to find me, ckxdigital.com is a great place. Obviously, they can search for me, Chuck Kirkpatrick. I'm high on the Google search rank.
Number one.
But it's a story this year of I'm exhilarated about this next phase, this next chapter. CKXD Studio is really our chance to focus on growth and then say, let's talk goals first and then back into what that might mean in terms of a particular software application or marketing tool or things like that. So it's a new chapter and it's really exciting.
Awesome. Well, it was great having you on the show, Chuck. I wish you the best, the very best.
Thank you.
And let's keep in touch. Thank you, everybody, for listening or for watching this show. We will be back next week with another guest. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.